You need to understand why this video found you right now. You're standing at a threshold most people never reach. Not because they're not capable, but because when they get here, when they feel what you're feeling, they turn around and run back to who they used to be. Back to the familiar, back to the comfortable prison they've been living in for years. But you didn't run. You're still here, still reading, still searching for the words that explain what's happening inside you. Here's what's happening. Your old self is dying. Not metaphorically, not eventually. Right now. You can feel it. That restlessness, that sense that you don't fit into your own life anymore. That growing distance between who you've been and who you're becoming. That's not confusion. That's death. The death of the version of you that's carried you this far, but can't take you any further. This video found you because you're ready to let them go. Nobody warns you about this part. You're addicted to who you were. Not because that version of you was happy. Not because they had it all figured out, but because they're familiar. You know how they think. You know how they react. You know what to expect from them. Your brain, your nervous system, your entire body has been running the same program for so long that it feels like that's just who you are. But it's not. It's who you've been practicing. There's a difference. Every time you respond to stress the same way, every time you make the same choices that lead to the same outcomes, every time you think the same thoughts that create the same feelings, you're not being yourself. You're being a recording of yourself, a loop playing over and over. The terrifying part is you don't even realize it's happening because the loop is so ingrained, so automatic that it feels like identity. Like this is just how I am. But it's not. It's just how you've been. Here's why that matters. You can't become who you're meant to be while you're still running the program of who you used to be. It's impossible. Every new opportunity, every new relationship, every new version of yourself that's trying to emerge, it's being filtered through the old operating system. The one that's built on past wounds, past fears, past versions of reality that don't exist anymore. So you keep repeating the same patterns. Dating the same type of person in a different body, chasing the same goals that don't actually fulfill you, reacting to new situations with old trauma. You're exhausted, not from life, from the weight of dragging a dead version of yourself into every new moment. Somewhere deep inside, you know it's time to let them go, but you're terrified because letting go of who you've been feels like dying. It is. It absolutely is. But here's what makes this moment different from every other time you've thought about changing. This time, you're not trying to become someone new while staying who you are. You're finally realizing that those two things can't coexist. The old you has to die for the new you to be born. I don't mean that in some dramatic burn your life down kind of way. I mean that the thoughts that got you here won't get you there. The beliefs that kept you safe in the past are keeping you small in the present. The identity you've been clinging to because it's familiar is the cage preventing you from becoming free. Until you're willing to let that version of yourself die, until you're willing to grieve them, thank them, and release them, you'll stay stuck. Not because you're not trying, but because you're trying to build a new life with the blueprint of an old one. Think about how this shows up in your actual life. You say you want to change, but you're still hanging around the same people who knew the old you and expect you to stay that way. You say you're working on yourself, but you're still having the same internal conversations, replaying the same mental loops, reinforcing the same limiting beliefs. You say you're ready to grow, but you're still making choices from fear, from scarcity, from the version of you that learned to play it safe because the world felt dangerous. I'm not judging that. I'm naming it because you can't change what you're not willing to see. Most people spend their entire lives pretending they're evolving, while secretly holding on to the person they've always been, hoping that somehow magically they'll transform without having to let anything go. But transformation doesn't work like that. Something has to die for something to be born. That's not a metaphor. That's the law. Here's the part that makes this so hard. Letting your old self die doesn't just mean letting go of the bad parts. It means letting go of the identity you built around surviving those bad parts. The person who had to be strong because no one else was. The person who had to be perfect because love felt conditional. The person who had to dim their light because shining felt dangerous. Those versions of you served a purpose. They protected you. They got you through. There's grief in releasing them. Real grief. Because even though they were survival mechanisms, even though they were adaptations to pain, they were still you for years. They were all you knew how to be. Now you're being asked to let them go and trust that there's a version of you underneath all that armor. A version that doesn't need to perform or protect or prove. A version that can just exist. That's terrifying because you don't know that version yet. You've spent so long being the person you had to be that you forgot the person you actually are. How do you do it? How do you actually let the old self die without feeling like you're losing yourself entirely? You start by getting honest about what you're holding on to and why. What version of yourself are you still running? What story are you still telling about who you are based on who you used to be? What beliefs are you carrying that don't belong to the person you're becoming? Here's the shift. You stop trying to change those things. You just observe them. You notice the patterns without judgment. You watch yourself react the same way to the same triggers. Instead of beating yourself up for it, you just acknowledge it. Oh, there's the old program running. There's the version of me that learned to respond like this. In that observation, in that awareness, something starts to shift because you can't be aware of the loop and stay in the loop at the same time. Awareness itself begins to break the cycle, not because you're forcing change, but because you're finally seeing what's been invisible. Then you practice something radical. You practice letting yourself be different. Not performing different. Not pretending to be different. Actually allowing yourself to think new thoughts, make new choices, respond in new ways. Even when it feels unfamiliar. Even when it feels uncomfortable. Even when every part of you is screaming to go back to what you know. Because that discomfort, that unfamiliarity, that's not a sign you're doing it wrong. That's a sign the old self is dying and the new self is being born. Birth is messy. It's painful. It doesn't feel like progress in the moment. It feels like chaos, like you don't know who you are anymore. You don't because you're not the person you were, but you're not fully the person you're becoming yet either. You're in the in-between, the void. The death before the rebirth. Most people panic here. They run back to the familiar because the unfamiliar feels like falling apart. But you're not falling apart. You're falling together in a new way. In a way that doesn't need the old armor, the old patterns, the old identity to feel whole. If what we're exploring here is resonating with you, if you're starting to see your own patterns in this, I'd genuinely appreciate it if you'd subscribe to the channel. We're creating a space for people who are actively in this transformation, who are willing to let the old self die so the real self can emerge. Your subscription helps us reach more people who are ready for this work. Please take a moment and hit that subscribe button. Now let's talk about what happens when you finally allow it. When you stop resisting the death of your old self and start trusting the birth of the new one, you become unrecognizable to yourself and to everyone who knew the old you. Some people won't like it. Some people will try to pull you back. They'll say you've changed like it's an insult. You'll smile and say, I know, because you're not apologizing for your evolution anymore. You're not shrinking to make other people comfortable. You're not performing the old version of yourself to keep the peace. You're just being, fully, unapologetically. That presence, that authenticity, that's what you've been chasing all along. Not a better version of who you were, but the truest version of who you are. The one that's been buried under years of conditioning, trauma, expectations, survival. When that version emerges, when you finally let the old self die so the real self can breathe, everything changes. Not because your circumstances magically shift, but because you're no longer trying to force your new life to fit your old identity. You're finally free to become who you've always been underneath everything you had to be. The death of your old self happens in stages, not all at once. First, there's the awareness. You start noticing the patterns you've been running, the ways you automatically respond, the thoughts that loop without your permission, the behaviors you engage in even though they don't serve you anymore. This awareness feels uncomfortable because you can't unsee what you've seen. You can't go back to operating unconsciously once you've woken up to your own programming. Then there's the resistance. Part of you fights to keep things the same. Your nervous system registers change as threat, even when the change is positive. You'll find yourself sabotaging your own growth, making choices that pull you back into old patterns, surrounding yourself with people and situations that reinforce who you used to be. This isn't weakness. This is your biology trying to protect you by keeping you in the known, even when the known is painful. After resistance comes the softening. You start to see your old self with compassion instead of judgment. You recognize that every behavior, every pattern, every defense mechanism served a purpose at one time. You thank them for keeping you safe when you needed safety. You honor them for getting you through when survival was the only option. This gratitude creates space for release. You can't let go with clenched fists. You have to open your hands, acknowledge what you've been holding, and gently set it down. Then comes the void, the space between who you were and who you're becoming. This is the hardest part because there's nothing to hold on to. No clear identity, no familiar patterns, no sense of solid ground. You're suspended between versions of yourself, and it feels like free fall. Everything that used to define you has dissolved, and nothing has solidified yet to take its place. People in your life will notice you're different, but won't be able to name how. You'll notice you're different, but won't be able to explain it. In the void, you're rebuilding from the foundation up. You're questioning beliefs you've held your entire life. You're examining behaviors you've never examined before. You're feeling emotions you've been suppressing for years. You're discovering parts of yourself that have been dormant. This isn't comfortable work. There's no blueprint for it. No timeline. No guarantee of what you'll find when you dig this deep. But this is where the real transformation happens. Not in the dramatic moments of change, but in the quiet, uncomfortable work of becoming someone you've never been. The void is where you learn to trust yourself differently. The old you trusted familiar patterns. The new you has to learn to trust the unknown. The old you found security in predictability. The new you has to find security in flexibility. The old you needed to know the outcome before taking the step. The new you has to step without knowing where your foot will land. This is terrifying. It's also liberating, because once you learn that you can survive the void, once you discover that you don't fall apart when everything familiar dissolves, you realize you're capable of anything. The new self doesn't arrive fully formed. It grows in increments. Each time you honor a boundary instead of crossing it. Each time you speak your truth instead of performing what others want to hear. Each time you choose alignment over approval. Each time you trust your intuition over external validation. You're building the new identity one choice at a time. Not because you're trying to become someone else, but because you're finally allowing yourself to be who you've always been underneath the conditioning. This new version of you will confuse people. They'll expect you to respond the way you always have. They'll wait for you to fall back into old roles and patterns. When you don't, some will adjust. They'll recognize your growth and meet you where you are. Others won't. They'll resist your evolution because it challenges their perception of themselves. They'll try to pull you back into old dynamics because your change forces them to confront their own stagnation. Let them. Your evolution isn't contingent on their approval. The people who are meant to be in your life will recognize the new you and celebrate it. They'll see your authenticity and feel safe to be more authentic themselves. They'll witness your boundaries and respect them. They'll appreciate your growth instead of feeling threatened by it. These are your people, not the ones who love the version of you that made yourself small, but the ones who love the version of you that takes up space. As you continue to let the old self die, you'll notice your relationship with yourself changing. You'll stop seeking external validation because you've found internal worth. You'll stop performing because you've discovered presence. You'll stop proving because you've learned to simply be. This shift is subtle but profound. It changes how you move through the world, how you show up in relationships, how you make decisions, how you spend your energy. Before we close, I want to ask you something. If this message is landing, if you're recognizing yourself in this process of death and rebirth, please subscribe to the channel. We're building a community of people who are willing to do this deep work, who understand that real transformation requires letting go of who we've been. Your subscription tells us this matters, that these conversations need to continue. Please take a moment and subscribe. Thank you for being here. Your old self was never supposed to last forever. They were a chapter, a necessary one that taught you, shaped you, protected you. But chapters end. Trying to live in a chapter that's already over doesn't honor the story. It just keeps you stuck, rereading the same pages, wondering why the plot isn't moving forward. You're not stuck. You're just holding on to a version of yourself that's already gone. The moment you release them, the moment you let the old self die with gratitude instead of grief, with trust instead of terror, the next chapter opens. Not because you earned it, but because you made space for it. By no longer being who you were. By finally allowing yourself to become who you're meant to be. That version, the one emerging right now, the one you can feel taking shape, they don't need to perform. They don't need to protect. They don't need to prove. They just need permission to exist.